I've got no idea if I'm on stage or not. Can somebody just indicate in chat if I am? All right, brilliant. Sorry, this is like me being the idiot here. So welcome back, everybody. I hope you're well refreshed, and we've had some really good chat on the table that I'm sat on around the speakers that we've heard from this morning. Lots of passion. Obviously, we've got the Q&A that we can cover off later. We're now going to hear from Dr. Kul Verma. He, as I alluded to earlier, spent a predominant amount of his career in policing, rolling out leadership development, both nationally and internationally. He's going to talk today about how organisations need to go beyond compliance, the importance of thinking through strategically how we empower people to gather evidence and how we use emotional intelligence to ensure we include everybody. Kul's a very interesting person. So I hope you get as much out of the session today as I did in my conversation earlier in the week. I'll hand over to you, Kul.
Thank you very much, Ali, for inviting me to this fantastic conference. I've been moving around. It's my first time on Remo, and it's blown my mind, actually. It's really good. I'm going to have to use this as well. So firstly, thank you very much for joining me. Let me just try and get my PowerPoint up so that you can see it. Okay, let's have a look. Okay, application. Okay, I'm having some trouble in putting my PowerPoint up. It's not wanting to play on the application window. Can I ask Sharon just to put the PowerPoint up for me, please?
Sorry, Kul. We could do a little interlude or something. I don't know.
Well, we could. I mean, the first bit, really, what I'd like to really get going on is this quest for leadership. Now, when we talk about the quest for leadership, I look at my 30 years in policing, and I was the good, bad, and the ugly in terms of a leader. And it's really interesting how we try and get this role of a leader, what a leader does, and it's really interesting in terms of how to go forward. And one of the things that I passionately believe is that we need to know why we're doing things within an organization, and then secondly, what do we expect from our leaders. And when I say that, it's quite interesting when I go around, there's all these definitions around leaders. I'm just having a look to see whether, has the PowerPoint gone up? Hi.
Looks like there's a little bit of technical difficulty. I don't know if you can start talking to it, and then maybe Sharon can try and get it up. And if not,
of course,
participants afterwards.
Of course, that's fine. That's fine. So in terms of oh, here we go. We've got this on. If we just put it onto the full mode. Yeah. So if we have the first slide, just the intro, please. The first page. Hi, Lynn. I do apologise to the rest of the group. Sharon has got the latest PowerPoint. This isn't the latest one. So if Sharon could actually send you the PowerPoint, that would be brilliant. I'm going to carry on without the PowerPoint, and hopefully the revised PowerPoint will come on. What to expect from me today? First of all, I want to consolidate the why for inclusive leaders in the workplace. Inclusion is such a used word, but understood by organisation. Then I want to try and share some best practice, and then I want to create some new thinking. So success for me, for all of you, will be if you are leaving here with some interesting thoughts in your head, some challenges that you're putting towards yourself, that will be brilliant. So I'm going to go on a little bit about me. I run my own consultancy firm after 30 years of policing. I've worked with all sorts of clients in the private sector, in policing sector, security, Royal Mail. But one of the things that really struck me about my reflection of joining a large organisation was that when I joined a long time ago, it wasn't that inclusive at all. And going in there was quite daunting in terms of being, every time I got promoted or moved, I was the first at everything. And when I've spoken to female colleagues, they feel the same. Other BAME officers and police staff feel the same as well. But one of the things that really struck me when I first joined was when I arrived at St. Anne's Police Station in my full uniform, a person, a guy called Paul, I won't say his second name just to save him embarrassment, just looked me up and down as if I was a piece of dirt and said, "Oh, F me, is that the kind of people we're letting into the police?" And that was my first introduction. But luckily, there was Dougie Richardson, who was a fantastic leader. He put his arm around me, took me to the sergeant's room and got me a cup of tea. And my team were tremendous. If it wasn't for my team actually showing me resilience around difference, and they wanted me to be included, I would have left. I totally wouldn't have stayed in the force. So I'm a great believer in terms of when we talk about resilience, when we talk about inclusion and difference, sometimes we are missing the point that I believe that most people are there to do the best, and most people are there to actually help one another. So in that's quite an interesting one in terms of retaining difference. Thank you. I think we're back up. So we're on slide 4 now. Slide 4. Move on. That's it. That's where we're up to date now. So thank you, Lynn, for helping me out on this one. What is difference and what's inclusion? This is really to the nub of this. In terms of difference, I see a lot of organizations looking at difference and just retaining that sort of focus. And difference means measures and the number of diversity. When we talk about inclusion, that's where you have a sense of belonging. So a good example is you could have your organization, you could say, okay, we're going to have inclusion in there and we're going to have diverse leaders. You could invite people to the table, but if you don't allow them to have a voice and an influence in your organization, you just keep into the left-hand side, recognizing difference. But if you allow people to inform policies, decision making, it's quite rich in terms of what you get from them. Certainly, when I've seen in public service, we've had a lot of issues around recognizing disabilities, recognizing people's home circumstances. Certainly with COVID, that has really taken us, blown the hole through home working and flexible working. Whereas before, there was lots and lots of people, certainly from my industry, from policing, that were told, you've got to choose between the job or your family. And in terms of inclusion, I would really get people around leadership teams to really look at what does difference mean to them and what is inclusion. So what are they doing? And ask, when you look at recruitment, retention and progression of BAME or female staff, how do you value people? What do people do in terms of having a voice, a real voice? If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, I just put this up and it's quite interesting. So one of the speakers, Alicia, I've got to say to her, thank you very much. She mentioned the why, and she also was very brave in terms of confronting some of the issues that are facing your sector. So thank you very much. And we're talking about sort of recruitment, retention, and progression. If we don't see those as linked policies or strategies, then we're on a cliff edge, because you can recruit as much as you can, because usually when we recruit people, we tell them the best of the organization. When they come in, sometimes they may see things that they haven't expected, or they're confronted by the culture. When they see that, then there's a right issue in terms of retaining really good people. And then the next is, how do you allow people to have a safe space to be fairly progressed throughout the organization? And I think sometimes the progression issue is seen too narrowly as to get to the top. There is another way of looking at progression, where you have lateral development in terms of developing your own skills. In Greater Manchester, one of the contracts that I had, we did a case study, and the simple thing was to ask, why? Why do we need inclusion? Just tell me why. Give me an elevator pitch. Give me a short sentence to say why we need this. And I'm passionate about, a lot of organizations are doing things without knowing the why. When you know the why, then it's quite easy to move to the what and the how. Sometimes you don't have the resources and you need to build that up, but without centering on the why, you haven't got a cat in hell's chance. And a lot of leaders that I see, that I develop and I coach, that's the key question I say to them. Why? Why are you a leader? What is it that you want to do? So that is a really, really powerful question. There's a McKinsey report in 2018, and what that report said was that greater diversity in the workforce results in greater profitability and value creation. What we're talking there is opening up new markets. A lot of the time when we have organizations, they are just very blinkered in terms of who their customer base is. And isn't it amazing, when we look at the range of foods that we've got in our supermarkets? Certainly when I came to this country with my mum, there was no Indian food. There was no rice as you find it. Certainly there wouldn't be gluten-free. But if you bring diversity in, you actually open up markets, and you actually make your organization responsive to the current time. Can I have the next slide, please? I feel very grand doing this. We did do, I just wanted to show you a case study. Again, when we talked about why do we need inclusive leaders, we need to know, what does inclusion mean to the individual, the team, the organization? And then what I did with that team is to try and define a sentence that would be immediately understood. And then asking that question, why do we need inclusive identities? Why are they in the workplace? What do they do? And one of the things around that workshop was that it was amazing that people wanted people with differences, but what they also then did through the culture was try and wash away those differences and get them to do exactly the same thing as that organization is doing. And that's sheer madness. What we need to do is bring people with difference in and utilize their human capital, and so that they retain that human capital, so it becomes more productive for the organization. What I mean by that is cultural knowledge, languages, the skills that they may have. You can actually have people that are working in organizations that bring in their skills, their knowledge. So we need to ask that question again, why? And what are we going to do with people if we build this inclusive organization? Can I have the next slide, please? The pitfalls of not having an inclusive leadership strategy, I've put those pictures up about Black Lives Matter, and it's quite amazing in terms of Black Lives Matter, how it's resonated in the UK. The resonation is the uncovering of the fractures that we've had in society for a long time. And what the Black Lives Matter movement has done, it's allowed people to have a conversation. And I think that's been wanting for a long time. in this country, our nemesis, well, not nemesis, but our great wave of conversation was around Stephen Lawrence in 1999. But what happened with that is that people operationalize a very emotive subject in terms of community, in terms of inclusive leadership. And what we've resulted in is that we keep doing the same thing, but we don't alter the how. We don't alter the methodology. So for your organization, if you don't have an inclusive leadership strategy, what's the best and worst case scenario? And I have to say that in terms of the inclusive leadership strategy, what Black Lives Matter is really talking about is the institutional racism that defines a lot of our structures and processes. It still does. And what I say to leaders in all sectors is that, you know, when you're weeding the garden and you might have some cultural issues, you need to weed and take out the roots. And one of the things that we haven't done in that analogy is that in the UK, we might have thought we've taken the weeds out, but some of those roots are really, really ingrained, and we call that culture. Can I have the next slide, please? And I'm going to try and wrap up, move on. Privilege and unconscious bias. If you tap it again, it should come out. I spent 6 years of my life, 6 years of my life looking at police racism. And far too long, what we've done is that we focused on technical issues. Now, in the report that you had this morning, we had leaders that said that we were focusing too much on the technical issues rather than emotional behaviors or emotional intelligence. So there was a study done with millionaires in the US. And what they did was they studied these millionaires who were very, very successful. They had very little technical skills. They had very little managerial skills. What they had high on their side was emotional intelligence. Their social confidence in going forward, taking a risk, and actually engaging with people and making those relationships. And I think what we need to do is when we're talking about a leadership paradigm, what is that leadership paradigm? Now, earlier, we were talking about management and leadership, and we have this debate all the time. Can you have one without the other? Well, there's elements of both. Now, take for example, when you're in an organization, do you want to be paid on time? Of course you do. So that's where it needs a lot of management in the accounts department to get that money into your bank. That's management. That is a process. But when you talk about leadership, about in that accounts department, talking about change or reduction or a change of process, what you need is emotional intelligence. Leadership is an art. Leadership is an art in terms of, one, knowing your own self-identity, and then two, being able to self-express that and really connect with your staff. So I'm really passionate about leadership, and for leaders to really grow, they need that underpinning. They need technical skills, but they need the underpinning of emotional intelligence. Can I have the next slide, please? These are some of the questions. I'm not going to go through them. If you had to improve a culture of inclusive leadership, what would you see, feel, and do? This is really important for your staff. You know, in that research that's been done for you, you know, that leadership report, that's what I would get those senior leaders to say. What if you were really truly inclusive? What would you see, feel, and do? What would your organisation look like in terms of its service provision? Can I have the next slide, please? If you hit it again, it should give you. Yeah, keep hitting it. So one of the things that I do with organizations and teams is what I do is we build a framework for team and leadership development. We look at inclusivity. And one of the ways of doing this is imagine that you're on this boat. What you've got at the top are the wins. These are positive actions that are going to take you to your destination in terms of having a more inclusive organization. And at the bottom, you've got those anchors. Those anchors are the cultures, the way you do things. the way things are done, how people get promoted, your processes, and those anchors are going to weigh you down. And what you need to do is really articulate what it is that's going to take us, what it is that's going to drag us back, and focusing on those anchors and decoupling those anchors sometimes can take a long time, but at other times it can be quite swift. One of our clients took our advice when we did a leadership review, and prior to getting promoted, the line manager had to sign you off. And what we found was that the line managers were sometimes subject to their own bias. They liked people in the teams, they didn't like other people in the teams. So what we did was just remove that anchor. And now what happens in that organization is that everybody's eligible for promotion, but they do it in a very sophisticated way of development. They need to do a career path. They need to collect leadership qualifications, and then at the end of that they can go for promotion, but they don't need the line manager. Sometimes these biases are unconscious. We don't know we're doing them. We always favor, like you have done in this conference, you will sit next to people that you know, or you like, or you think that are like you. That is a natural human tendency. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Now, you earlier, this is an addition that I put in. Earlier, you were talking about bringing people in from outside the sector and coming in. Well, the police service has already done that. That's the direct entry program. And at inspector and superintendent level, they are bringing people in that have had no knowledge of policing. If you did the same as a direct entry program, what would that look like? When it first came around, it must be 3 years ago, I was quite skeptical because I'd been a superintendent, and there are lots of things that you need to know about firearms, about neighbourhoods, about high risk public order. And I thought, how are these people going to get on? But the caliber of these people, and I actually deliver to the direct entry program, I'm absolutely astounded by the quality that has been attracted in. And that quality has the tenacity, the resilience, and the capability of actually absorbing a lot. And one of the things that I love about the direct entry program is that they didn't start from the bottom, and they come in with questions. They come in as superintendents or inspectors with questions about how things are done, about the culture, about leadership. And that really does make your snow globe start to shake. And for me, that is a very, very welcome introduction into an organization. So where we're talking about technical skills, we've used that paradigm all the time. Have technical skills, have a competency-based interview, and then we recruit. What we don't do is that we don't look for values. We don't look for emotional intelligence. So within policing, there are many people that have been racist or sexist that come into the organization. That's because the recruitment process has been competency-based and technically based. What's changed now is that there is a value-based process that is there to check on, are you the right fit for that organization? And I really say to the organization, technical skills are one thing, but underpinning those are values, and the values do have statements where you can actually go forward and use them very, very productively. I've just got Ellie over there. I'm just going to go one last slide, if I may, and then I'm going to stop. Is that okay? So if we go to the next slide. Next one. So here's some leadership questions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the PowerPoint because we're not going to be getting through this at all. But there are some questions for you as leaders. What are you going to do in terms of your leadership to change from being really wanting to change to be inclusive, to be really, really inclusive. And you can see there's some there about pay equity, etc. Lynn, can you just go to the last slide, please? Can you just zip through deep insight inclusion tools? No? Am I still live? Am I still talking? If I am, let me just wrap up by saying,
yeah, maybe just wrap up and then cool. Thanks.
Sorry, Ellie. I know you're under time pressure. If I wrap up, the why is really important. How you do things is really important. The last one is that slide is showing you some of the tools that we use within Deep Insight. One of them is about a team inclusion conversation map. How you get those conversations generated are really down to senior leaders changing the culture. So if there are two things I would get leaders to concentrate on, is leadership and culture. Both are interlinked. So thank you very much for listening to me this morning. Ellie, there you go. I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Cole. I'm really sorry that there were some technical difficulties for you there, because it's never easy, especially when you want trying to get into the flow and there's some disruption. But I think some of our candidates had difficulty with the slides, but we'll share those afterwards. But really, really interesting insights there. Some great questions, and we can probably cover some of those off as we go into the panel debate. Now, lots of questions have come through for you, Cole, so we'll pick those off as we go. Can I ask the organisers to bring all of the panel to the stage, the stage now, so that we can go straight into the Q&A? Is that okay? So I think we've got Alicia joining us again. We have Kate joining us. We've got the questions from earlier, and Rebecca Clark, our head of membership, is going to join us. And we've got about 20 minutes of Q&A. We've got some really interesting questions. Well, I'll start with one that I think is for you, Kate, because it came through during your presentation, which is around the research participants. And you spoke about specific out of housing sector examples which were useful for building relationships with and learning from. Are you able to share any of those examples, or is there something you can share potentially with the group afterwards?
No, I haven't got any particular examples there. Of course, I could go and revisit. The focus for the conversations was very much on let's bring people from different sectors. And as some of the subsequent questions have shown, what are we going to do with them when we get them? How are we going to induct them? How are we going to make sure that they learn the values of our sector and we benefit from the innovation that they're bringing from theirs? So I think it was a recurrent theme, but not sufficiently developed. But I will absolutely go back and check.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot we can learn from outside of the sector, and we do that quite well. I do think that sometimes we focus a little bit internally as well. So the next question, Toshin's question, I'm going to come back to, because I think Rebecca's going to join us in CIH to help to answer that. But there's a question for you, Cole, and it is an interesting question. What is the most common systemic issues in organisations and their cultures that you have experienced or witnessed?
For me, you know, it's not just police-based. It's I've been to other organisations that are private, and they seem more draconian and more. The culture seems more aggressive, especially in sales sectors, than it was ever in the police. I think for me, the two most common themes that come across is an institutionalization. Now, we can use institutional racism, but it's an institutionalization of the own organization that sets this is what success looks like. This is what relationships should be. And the last one is the inability to actually recognize bias, your personal bias, you know, confirmation bias, because that comes in, or the whole range of biases that come out. And I think when we start to diversify and make it a more inclusive organization that allows voice, then you start to unpick some of these. So those would be my the themes that I've seen.
Thank you. Thank you, Cole. There's a question for, it's for everybody really, but I'll start with you, Alicia, and then I think it'd be interesting to go round. It was really good to hear Alicia having the ability to reverse mentor. I have a reverse mentor and I get a lot from it. How can we get housing associations to set up shadow boards to assist with filling that gap between knowledge and skills? So if we start potentially with you, Alicia, and then I'll come to you, Kate, and then to you, Cole.
So the question is, how can the housing sector create a sector-wide strategy for reverse mentoring?
How can we? What do we need to do to help housing associations to set up shadow boards to assist with filling that gap between knowledge and skills? What do you think might work there?
I think if there is a framework in place and you bring together, for example, not just young people, but those who, for example, BAME people who do actually want to participate in reverse mentoring as the mentor for the senior people, put everybody in a room to come up with that framework of the different sessions for all housing associations to be able to put in their own reverse mentoring systems, and then to tailor it and adapt it to what their housing association actually needs.
Kate?
I was really pleased to hear Alicia's example about reverse mentoring, because when this first started being talked about, what wasn't questioned is what actually mentoring is. And I think it's like lots of things, people think they know what it is, they think they know that they're doing it, but actually they're probably not. And a mentoring relationship to me is only successful if both parties are benefiting from it. It's not the transmission of experience and knowledge from some older person to a younger person. It's about sharing insights, perspectives, and both learning from it. And I think in order to achieve that, you have to learn how to mentor. You have to really examine what it is we want from this and how are we going to be good at it, and not just assume because one's older and experienced, one's a great mentor.
Sorry, just to explain why Rebecca's joined us, because there's a couple of specific questions about what CIH are doing. So I wanted, because that's been one of the most popular questions I've asked her as head of membership to come to the table. But we'll come to you, Cole, because I'm sure you've got some good ideas about how we might help housing associations to set up shadow boards.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I think the intent is always there in terms of having mentoring, and it's slightly different to coaching. And mentoring is quite easy thing to set up for a small, medium-sized organisation to a large organisation. Coaching seems to be a little bit more expensive. But in terms of reverse mentoring, when we start talking about reverse mentoring, what you're doing there is you're giving a life perspective to somebody else. This is what it looks like. So my background is policing, so we've set up a reverse mentoring scheme in Greater Manchester Police, and what that's about is for senior leaders to listen to the life narrative of BAME officers and police staff at a really junior level. And that does two things. One, it makes them more aware about how to be inclusive, but two, it gives them organizational intelligence about what to do. And I think one of the things that we really need to be clear about is, why we're doing it and what outcomes we're hoping to achieve. And I think with a lot of stuff that I see, I go into organizations and I'll say, have you got a mentoring scheme? Have you got a reverse mentoring scheme? Yeah, tick, tick. So there's a tick box approach. I would really get people to step back, have a real review, and answer those questions. Why, the what, and how are we going to do that? And then how are we going to measure it? And I think there's some great examples, but the housing sector context is different to other contexts. So you might need to have a little bit of planning around how you would share that around. So, with the advent of COVID-19, we're doing this conference online. That bit about reverse mentoring, going somewhere, you know, you could do it online quite simply, but you've got to get the right people on board, and sometimes you do have to stop putting up schemes where people are allowed to kick the organisation. If you want to kick the organisation, have forums where people can have voice. So that would be my view on it, Ellie.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I just wanted to add myself really was around housing associations and shadow boards. You know, I'm acutely aware coming into the role that I recently moved into of like my knowledge gaps as well. And actually, you know, there is a need to enable younger people or less experienced people to develop the skills that are required at that level. CIH Futures, aside from one of the reasons that I was involved in bringing it to fruition, aside from the fact that it's a voice for younger people in the housing sector, was because I wanted to create a semi sort of shadow CIH board where younger people could experience what that felt like to work together in that environment, in that governance environment. I think that this is something I'm going to take back to CIH board about how we can help the sector to start to close some of this gap. So the conversation today has been really helpful. I'm going to come to you next, Rebecca, because the most popular question today, I think, is one that you can answer. And I love the way it's pitched. This is all very interesting to get out of sector knowledge and experience, which it is. But what are the plans to develop those who want to develop into leaders within the sector who already have the knowledge? And how is CIH helping to support that?
Yeah, that is a very good question. Just to kind of link it back into the last question on one thing we are doing, our series that we started that you mentioned at the beginning, Ellie, the CIH Building Better Boards programme, the next session on September the 30th will actually be about how we increase equality and diversity on boards, and it will also make reference to a race code that's been developed by a guy called Carl George. So hopefully that will help give some really practical tools and solutions at that level to try and do that, and we'll be fully endorsing and supporting all of that. And it will also make reference to Progress Housing Group, who are one of the first organisations to actually have a shadow board. So there'll be details of that on our website if anybody would like to come along to that. And aside from that, I think one of the most powerful things that we're trying to do at the moment is the development of our professional standards framework, which will actually create kind of clear pathways and progression within the housing sector linked to competencies and behaviours and skills. And that will, again, give greater encouragement and give a bit of direction, I think, in terms of people's career pathways and how organisations can actually look to bring aspiring and future leaders through those pathways with the support of CIH's qualifications, training, and then also what happens beyond this session as well. So I think what we were really pleased to see is such an amazing mix of people of lots of different levels within organisations on the session today. And I think, you know, if we can create opportunities like that to bring people together and actually talk about the issues and the themes of the report in a proactive way, then great. So, you know, the intention is to not just, you know, leave it here today, but to continue working with the ILM, and then also to put on quarterly leadership forums where it'll be similar to today, really, where aspiring leaders can come and mix with existing leaders, learning and development professionals, and hopefully be the change that they want to see with our support. So if anyone does have feedback and ideas, you know, we're all ears at the moment, and we'd love to speak to you about, you know, how we can work with you to do that, really.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm really interested in that Progress shadow board piece of work. So I think hearing about that and how we might take that forward and expand that will be really useful. For those of you that know me, I'm more about not just getting together and talking, but creating some action as well. So let's pick up on that afterwards.
Yeah.
So a really good question here from Michelle. So Kate talked about resilience. How is vulnerability, uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure really perceived in an organisation? And I think we've probably seen much more of this recently, given the current environment we find ourselves in, particularly when that can sometimes be seen as a lack of resilience. I'm not sure that Kate's still with us, so I'm going to cut. Oh, you are. Sorry, Kate, because your camera was off. Do you want to pick that up, and then I'll see if anybody else has got anything they want to add?
Yeah, I love that question. I think that's brilliant, because actually too often I think resilience is seen as something lacking if you're not thriving in organizations. And I think what has happened particularly recently is the insights we've got into the complexity and the different demands people are juggling, as well as trying to do their work, has made people seemingly a bit more understanding and a bit more compassionate and a bit more about managing the whole person. But I think going back to some of the things Kul was talking about, you can only say what resilience is in your organization, in your culture, if you call it out and talk about it. Well, okay, we're talking about resilience. What do we mean by that? What does that mean here? What are the expectations of resilient leaders? And then people know what to do or what it looks like, and maybe how they can develop it if that's needed.
I second that, and I'll come on to you, Kul, and then Alicia, in that, you know, there's a lot of rhetoric and kind of words that are used like resilience that are just words and collaboration. And I think, yeah, great, we know we need to do that, but what does that actually mean for us? And I'm a big advocate of kind of demonstrating what that looks like within an organization. Kul, I don't know if you've got anything to add, and then I'll come to you, Alicia.
Yeah, absolutely agree with Kate in terms of what resilience is. And I think, you know, whatever framework that you're making, and Rebecca was talking about competencies, you know, I'm hearing it, I'm here, I want to hear in organizations those underpinning values that set about how people do business. So when we talk about resilience is, you know, Kate said earlier, just get on with it. Well, resilience in the police service was, you know, if it's too hot in here, just leave. That's what resilience was. And I bet you in your organization, your sector, is that if you can't cope with the demands, well, somehow you're not up to it. I think resilience is a little bit more subtle than that. In terms of leadership resilience, that's about your own well-being. And you know, sometimes when I'm coaching people, the resilient response is no. Knowing what your capability is and knowing when you've had enough in terms of safeguarding your well-being. And I know it sounds a little bit soft in terms of your own self well-being, but crikey, you know, we don't expect pilots to, you know, take us around the world for 8 hours or 12 hours or beyond that. We don't ask people to do things on ships. There is a resilience that we need to build in. And I think for leaders, the resilience is really about their own well-being and then the well-being of their staff. So how can we get resilient at that? And again, it drives towards emotional intelligence all the time. So that would be my response, Ellie.
Thank you. Alicia, what are your thoughts? Sorry, I think that people may have raised their hands for questions as well, but I'm not seeing it. So at the moment, I'm just going through the Q&A. So if you have got questions, if you pop them on there, I'll try and come to you. But I'll come to you now, Alicia, for your thoughts on resilience and how do we that to be talked about in terms of vulnerability within the world.
I think I agree with everything Kate and Kul have said, and I think in it, for example, a lot of young people that I know, when that they're having their mentoring sessions, resilience is one of the things that crops up quite a lot. And I think, as has been mentioned, it's so important to actually define what resilience actually is. And normally sessions run where it's building resilience in terms of building good relationships with others, learning to build confidence and take on different challenges, and learning to identify and express your own emotions. So I think it is all about, you know, values and having that emotional intelligence. But I think having a mentor can really help you to develop that.
Fantastic, thank you. There's a question here, and we had a little bit of a debate about this at a table in the networking break about how we as a sector can recruit more young people who live in their homes to work in the sector, and the sons and daughters of our tenants. Just to kind of before I offer it open to whoever wants to come in on that, I think one of the things is going back to the rationale. So why would we want that? Why would we want young people to work in the sector? And that was one of the things with with CIH Futures. It was kind of recognizing that there is so much value and untapped potential within that group of young people. It's absolutely completely wasted in many organizations because we just do not recognize that it's there, and we don't necessarily see that value. We looked at things like, 20 years of experience, and people saying things like, when I was in the housing corporation, and all those things that are like trailed out, that are kind of badges of honor, that are seen as like, if you haven't done that, then you don't have something to add. So from my point of view, I think there's something about starting with the very basis about why we might do that, and again, that might be the same from our residents. I'm going to open this up now, so if anybody wants to come in on that.
I'll come in, Ellie, if that's okay. I think there's two things there in terms of the marketplace, in terms of getting people to come into a sector that they haven't previously thought about. So every organisation is fishing in the same pool. One of the things that you have is that you will have you'll have experiences of people. And my mind goes back. I had a training session in Gibraltar, and there was one person there. They had a terrible relationship with, I don't know whether it was the housing association or local authority, and their experience was negative. What I'm saying is that if there is a positive experience, people are more likely to join. And that then drives up the way in which you do business as well. And I think, people that have gone through housing, what a great experience they can bring to the table, especially in that operational delivery. That would be immense. But first of all, why should I join your organisation? And when I join your organisation, how will I be valued? And I think if we answer those two questions, then you can start on a journey to try and attract people.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Carl. And I think the second, the sort of reverse of that is how do we value our residents as well, and why aren't the opposite is why aren't we doing it in the way that you've just described? I'm going to give an opportunity for somebody else to come in if they want to, and then unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up the Q&A because I need to give Rebecca some time just to talk about CIH and the new membership offer. Kate or Alicia, I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to address the thing about trying to attract people from other sectors. I was talking to one of our members last week, actually, who's trying to move sectors, interestingly, out of a sales role. And she keeps getting shortlisted. And then at the final decision, she's told that, well, your experience doesn't really matter. And if you think about what's a transferable skill, emotional intelligence can take years to develop. You can keep getting better at it. You can swat up on some things. But again, going back to Kul saying about the tables we choose, it's so much easier, isn't it, to talk to people who know our sector? And we're so much more comfortable, and that must influence and affect the whole of the recruitment process. And so we've got to be encouraging managers, HR departments to be much more open about what they consider to be essential.
Absolutely. Alicia, I'm giving you the final word. So.
Oh, thank you, Ellie. Yeah, no, just to add, I'm sure we hear it a lot that when you ask people, how did you get into the sector? A lot of people say, I fell into the sector. And I think for a lot of young people, it's also about the way that you tell the story about the housing sector and how you move into the sector. So, yeah, I think it's just about storytelling it to inspire young people, and going back to what you said, Ellie, about the why do we want young people to work into the sector? Because of the value that they can bring.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. I'm going to hand to Rebecca now just to talk about the membership offer, and then we'll wrap up and go into some networking. So Rebecca, the floor's all yours.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ellie. Yeah, just a quick one from me, really, just to say thank you to all of the speakers, first of all, before I tell you about anything else. I think the session for me personally has been great. It's something that I'm passionate about as someone wanting to kick on in the sector. So thank you to all of you, and thanks to Ellie for chairing so expertly as we've gone along and bringing order to everything as best as we can. So I think leading on from today, like I mentioned a moment ago, we don't want the conversation to stop here, and we actually do want to see some action as well. And we want to support and champion any housing organisation or professional that's willing to help us on that. So thank you to all of you that have volunteered to send stuff through to us. Our partnership with the Institute of Leadership and Management will continue beyond today. So we're really pleased to let everybody know that we've agreed a new member benefit with the Institute of Leadership and Management, which means you'll be able to get joint membership. So by being a CIH member, you'll be eligible for a discounted rate of membership with the ILM of £90. And what we're aiming to achieve by that is make it more accessible on both sides, and not just create great leaders, but also great leaders in housing. So members will therefore have access to both sets of resources, events, webinars, all of the member benefits on both sides, which can hopefully help drive that forwards. And as I mentioned as well earlier on, we will be having quarterly leadership forums that continue to pick up on the themes that are mentioned in the report. And the final thing that's worth noting as well, we will send out more information about all of those things. And you should receive an email early next week with the recordings, a link to the report, and also information about what other work that we're doing around the training and qualifications, but also a new event series that we'll be running in partnership with the Disruptive Innovators Network called Write Your Future. And we also have Owning Your Future sessions, which are free for members as well, away from paid for events. So please do let us know next week if you have any questions. And thank you all for coming and joining us there. I hope you found it all very useful.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'd just like to say a really big thank you to our speakers. Sorry, I hadn't realised that you were going to leave the stage, but I'm sure that if we were at a real life event, you'd be getting a standing ovation for your fantastic presentations. I think we're all going to be around now for some Q&A, and there'll be some materials and things to follow. But if there are other things that you want or you think we've missed, or that you need a bit more detail, so I know particularly, for example, Cole's slide, some of you may have had difficulties, we can arrange that for you. But thank you very much today, and let's maybe head into the virtual lounge for some I don't know, brownies and coffee or whatever we usually have at these events. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.